I always thought betrayal was one of those things that only happened to other people. It was easy to sympathize with people who went through it, but I never thought it would happen to me. I was wrong, and that wrongness hit me hard, like a punch to the gut, the kind of pain you feel deep down in your stomach before your brain even catches up. It started with a text. Just a random number, no name attached. I didn't think much of it at first. Spam. One of those chain messages, or some weird scam. But when I looked at the picture attached to it, everything froze. It was a picture of me and Emily, my girlfriend of 3 years, at a party a few months ago. We were laughing. I had my arm around her shoulders, and she was leaning into me with that little smile she always gets when she's happy. It wasn't a big deal on the surface, but the message that came with it, that was what stopped me in my tracks. You didn't think I'd find out, did you? It was from an unknown number. No signature. No context. Just that message. And the weird thing, there was nothing about the photo that would have set it apart from any other party picture. But as I stared at it, a creeping doubt started to gnaw at me. I'd seen that picture before. But why would someone send it to me now? I dismissed it at first. Maybe it was some random coincidence, a prank. A few hours later, another message came through. This time, it was a screenshot of Emily's phone, her messages, right there for anyone to see. One was a conversation between her and a guy named Luke, my best friend, my buddy since high school. I didn't need to read any more after that. I already knew what I was looking at. My stomach twisted up into knots, a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, and I felt sick to my core. There was no denying it. There was no way this was a misunderstanding. The worst part wasn't just that she was texting him. It was the way they were talking. The tone of it, the casual flirtation. The inside jokes, only they shared. The way they went back and forth like they were alone, like I didn't exist. I should have confronted her right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. My hands were shaking, my head spinning. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Didn't want to be the kind of guy who assumed the worst. But this was different. It was so damn different. The night went on, but I couldn't focus on anything. I went to bed beside her, trying to act normal, but my mind wouldn't shut off. Every thought I had circled back to those messages. To her and Luke. To the way she'd looked at me earlier that day. Guilt masked behind a smile. I had no idea how long it had been going on. And that made the whole situation worse. Because if it had been going on for months, what did that mean for us? I didn't sleep. I couldn't. By the time morning came, I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to let this slide. I wasn't going to let her lie to my face anymore. But I didn't confront her right away. No, I was smarter than that. I needed to find out everything. I had to be sure, get all the details, understand just how deep this betrayal ran. It wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about Luke, too. My best friend. The guy I had shared everything with. The guy I trusted. So, I did what anyone would do when they're in a situation like this. I started digging. I went through her texts, every single one. I saw the full extent of their conversations. They had been seeing each other in secret, meeting up while I was at work, texting late into the night when I thought she was sleeping. I even found receipts in her purse from a hotel they had stayed at. It made me sick just to think about it, to picture them together, sharing moments that should have been mine. I wanted to confront her right then. I wanted to scream, to throw things, to make her understand what she'd done. But I didn't. I kept my cool. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I wasn't going to let her twist this around, make me look like the crazy, paranoid boyfriend. No, I was going to handle this my way. That's when I started thinking about Luke. My best friend. The guy I trusted with everything. He was the one who had stood by me through thick and thin. We'd been through so much together, and I never once questioned our bond. But now everything was different. Now, I couldn't look at him without seeing him as a liar, a backstabber. I'd been so naive, thinking he'd never do something like this. But there it was, plain as day. He was just as guilty as Emily. Maybe even more so. I needed to talk to him. I needed him to know that I knew. But I wasn't going to let him off easy. No, I had a plan. And this plan would make sure he felt the weight of his actions. Make sure he understood exactly how it felt to betray someone who had given him everything. I sent Luke a text later that day. Simple. Casual. Hey man, you free this Saturday? Let's have a guys' night. Catch up. I watched the 3 little dots pop up as he typed his response. Hell yeah. Sounds good, bro. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence hang there for a moment, like I was waiting for something. But I didn't need to say anything else. I knew the plan. I knew how I was going to make him feel what I was feeling. Saturday couldn't come soon enough. Every minute felt like a day, and I spent the entire week obsessing over how I was going to handle this. I couldn't just let him walk into my house, sit on my couch, and act like everything was fine. No, I wanted him to feel it. Feel the weight of his betrayal, the shame, the guilt. I wanted him to stew in it. I wanted him to suffer. The worst part of all of this, I wasn't sure what I was going to do after. Once I laid it all out, once I had my revenge, what would be left? Could I ever trust him again? Could I ever trust Emily? Would I even want to? I didn't have the answers yet. All I knew was that I had to do this, for my own sanity. I had to confront them both, and I had to do it in a way that would leave no doubt about what they had done. Saturday came, and Luke was walking into my house, clueless, just like I'd planned. Saturday night felt like an eternity in the making. I had spent the whole week ruminating over how to handle Luke. It was one thing to confront Emily. She was my girlfriend, and I had to know where we stood. But Luke, the guy I had been friends with since high school, that was a whole different beast. I couldn't let him off easy, though. I wasn't going to just give him a chance to explain, not without making him feel exactly what I felt. I needed him to stew in his own guilt. I needed him to sit with the weight of what he had done. I hadn't talked to Luke much since I found out. There was too much tension, and honestly, I couldn't even bring myself to pretend everything was normal. So, when I sent that text to him a few days ago, suggesting a guy's night, I didn't think much of it at first. I was trying to be casual, trying to act like I hadn't already pieced everything together. In reality, though, I was already planning how to make him squirm, make him see what I had seen, make him realize the depth of the hole he had dug. When Luke responded with his usual enthusiasm, I almost felt guilty. Hell yeah. Sounds good, bro. There was nothing in that message that gave me away. Nothing that hinted at what I knew. And that's what I wanted. I wanted him to walk in, completely clueless. I wanted him to be comfortable. I wanted him to think it was just another night of us, kicking back like we used to, watching the game, cracking jokes, talking about whatever was on our minds. But I was going to ruin all of that. I was going to tear the whole thing down. I got home early on Saturday to set everything up. I knew I had to act like everything was fine. If I made one wrong move, one tiny slip, Luke would pick up on it. And I needed him to be completely unprepared for what was coming. I grabbed some beers from the fridge and set up the living room. Pizza, wings, chips, all the usual stuff we used to grab for these nights. I even pulled out a couple of old games we used to play. Nothing out of the ordinary. Nothing that would make him think twice. 7 p.m. rolled around, and that's when I heard the knock on the door. Yo, what's up, man? Luke grinned as I opened it. I forced a smile. Same old, same old. Glad you could make it. We exchanged the usual bro hug, the one that used to feel natural, but now just felt off. It felt like there was a wall between us, even though we were both pretending everything was normal. I led him inside, gesturing to the couch. Grab a seat. I'll get the beers, I said, keeping my tone even. Luke kicked off his shoes and settled down, looking like he was ready to kick back. He picked up the remote and flipped through the channels, not yet noticing the tension hanging in the air. I could feel the knot in my stomach growing tighter, but I couldn't show it. Not yet. I grabbed 2 beers from the fridge, popped the caps, and handed one to him. He cracked it open and took a long swig. Man, I've been looking forward to this all week, he said, giving me a grin. It was the kind of grin I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said nothing could go wrong, that we were just 2 guys hanging out. But I wasn't going to let him stay in that illusion for long. I sat down next to him on the couch, my eyes never leaving his face. I didn't say anything at first. I just watched him, watched how at ease he was, how he had no idea what was coming. It made the anger rise up in me all over again. Do you ever think about the past, man? I asked, trying to sound casual. Luke looked over at me, his brow furrowing slightly. What do you mean? I leaned back on the couch, taking a sip from my beer. I was buying time, buying space in my head, to make sure I didn't lose my shit. I mean, like, back when we first started hanging out. High school days. It was just simpler back then, right? He chuckled. Yeah, man. Things were a lot less complicated. Just messing around, going to parties, trying to survive school. I nodded slowly, setting my beard down on the coffee table. I felt like I was slipping into a different version of myself. I had to be cold. I had to be calculated. Yeah, I guess. You know what's funny? I used to think things got complicated when you grow up. But really, the most complicated things happen when you think everything is fine. When you let your guard down. You know what I mean. Luke raised an eyebrow, clearly not picking up on the shift in tone. Sure, I guess. What are you getting at, man? I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. I think we've all been guilty of letting things slide. Things we should have caught. Things we should have paid attention to. Now he was looking at me, like he was starting to get a sense that something was wrong. But he still didn't know. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and handed it to him without saying a word. The messages were all right there, clear as day. Luke's face went pale as he started reading. The room was deathly silent. He looked up at me, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open. Man, I didn't let him finish. How long, Luke? How long were you planning on keeping this from me? A month? 2 months? I was practically spitting the words at him now. How long were you going to pretend like you weren't fucking my girlfriend? His face twisted in horror. Bro, I swear it wasn't like that. It was a mistake. We didn't. A mistake. I cut him off, my voice rising now. You think this was a mistake? You think fucking my girlfriend behind my back is a mistake? I don't think you even understand what you've done. Luke's eyes were shifting everywhere, but to me. He opened his mouth a couple of times, trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. He just looked lost, guilty, like a dog caught chewing on the furniture. I stood up and paced around the room. The anger was taking over, and it was hard to keep it under control. I trusted you. You were my best friend, man. I told you everything. I trusted you with my life. And you went and fucked it all up. I stopped pacing and turned back to him. I don't want to hear your excuses. I don't want to hear any more lies. Just sit there and feel the weight of what you did. Because you're going to sit with this. I'm done with you. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving him there alone to stew in the mess he'd made. I left him in the silence, the kind of silence that only guilt can fill. Let him have his time to think about what he had done. Let him sit with it. And after hours of him just sitting there, I came back. But there was no reconciliation. No, let's talk this through. I didn't want to hear him out. I was done. I cut him off. For good. I left Luke in that room for hours. I didn't know what he was feeling, but I didn't care. I was so caught up in my own storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, disgust, that I couldn't bring myself to even think about his side. He deserved it. Sitting there alone, forced to confront what he'd done. I had been thinking about this moment for days, planning every little detail, making sure it played out exactly how I wanted. I wanted him to feel like I felt, powerless, trapped, exposed. I didn't even know if he was going to try to explain himself. But honestly, after everything I'd seen, the texts, the photos, the hotel receipts, I didn't need an explanation. I didn't need any more of his bullshit. The clock on the wall ticked on as I stood in the kitchen, my back to the living room. I tried to focus on something, anything, just to calm myself down. But the thought of him sitting there, probably shuffling through all the excuses he could come up with, made me feel sick again. It was a waste of time. There was no fixing this. I hadn't expected him to break down in tears or beg for forgiveness. Honestly, if he had, I think I would have just thrown him out. The last thing I wanted was a show of fake remorse. That wasn't what I was looking for. I didn't want an apology that was just words. I wanted him to understand the full weight of what he'd done, to feel the real cost of betraying me, his best friend. I checked my phone. It had been hours, and there were still no text from him. I started pacing again. I had planned this confrontation to the letter, but now, in the silence, I was growing impatient. Every minute that passed was another minute of me stewing in my own anger. But it wasn't just anger. It was a deep sense of loss. I didn't know what hurt worse, the betrayal from Emily, or the fact that my best friend had helped her carry it out. I didn't know which one felt more like a punch to the chest. Finally, I walked back into the living room. Luke was still sitting on the couch, his face pale, his hands clasped together in his lap. His eyes locked onto mine the moment I walked through the door, and for a split second, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He stood up quickly. "Bro, I don't even know where to start," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I fucked up, I know. I never meant for things to go this far." I didn't say anything. I just stood there, staring at him. My silence was the loudest thing in the room. I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I wasn't going to let him off the hook with a quick apology or a half-hearted explanation. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I spoke. "You should have stopped. The moment you realized what was happening, you should have stopped. But you didn't. You kept going." Luke looked down at the floor, his face flushing with guilt. "I know. I didn't think it would turn into something like this. I didn't think it would hurt you." "You didn't think." I echoed, the words bitter on my tongue. "You didn't think. You knew exactly what you were doing. The second you started texting her, you knew it was wrong. And you didn't care. You kept lying. You kept hiding it. And for what?" I could see the guilt in his eyes, but I didn't want to let him off the hook. "Not yet." "What was it, Luke? Was it just for the thrill? Was I just some idiot in your eyes? Someone you could mess with when it was convenient for you?" His shoulders slumped, and he shook his head. "No, man. It wasn't like that. I don't know why it happened. I honestly don't. I know that doesn't make it right, but I wasn't trying to hurt you. I swear to God I wasn't." I stared at him, my chest tight. The truth was, I wasn't even sure what I wanted to hear anymore. What was the point of apologies when everything was already broken beyond repair? "So what now?" I asked, my voice flat. "What do you expect me to say?" "Oh, it's okay, man. I get it, mistakes happen." Luke opened his mouth, probably to say something else, but I cut him off. "You don't get it, do you? You don't get what you've done." I walked over to the window and looked outside for a moment, my fingers gripping the edge of the sill. "This isn't about you anymore. It's not about how sorry you are, or how much you regret it now. You betrayed me. You betrayed my trust. And I don't think I can ever look at you the same way again." There was a long pause. The air between us felt heavy, thick with all the things we hadn't said, the weight of everything that had happened in just a few hours. I felt that loss again, this sharp, aching emptiness where our friendship used to be. Luke stood there for a moment, just staring at me. It was almost like he was waiting for some kind of permission, waiting for me to say something that would undo all the damage. But there was no magic word, no special sentence that could fix this. "Not anymore. I guess this is it then, huh?" he asked quietly, his voice cracking just a bit. "You're cutting me off." The question was like a slap to the face. Of course, I was cutting him off. But I wasn't going to just say it like it was some simple decision. This wasn't easy. None of it was. "I don't know what else to say, Luke," I muttered. "I really don't." And that was it. There was nothing left to say. No more words that would make it better. No more chances. I walked past him, heading for the door. "I'll see you around," I said, not even turning back to look at him. But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. It didn't take long for everything to come crashing down. The days after the confrontation felt like a blur. There was a kind of numbness to everything, like I was walking through a fog, unable to fully process the events that had just unfolded. I didn't want to think about Luke anymore, but I couldn't help it. Every time I walked into a room where we used to hang out, every time I picked up my phone and saw a message from him, I felt that same gut punch of betrayal all over again. The same sickening feeling that had plagued me ever since I found out what had been going on behind my back. I thought about Emily too. A lot. But mostly in a way that made me hate myself for thinking about her at all. How could I still care about someone who had done this to me? Who had lied to my face? Who had been playing me for months? The answer was obvious, but the feeling wasn't. It wasn't easy to just shut off those feelings, no matter how much I wanted to. I spent most of my nights tossing and turning, staring at the ceiling, wondering what I had missed, what signs I had ignored. The truth was, Emily had been giving me those signs the entire time. She had been pulling away, acting distant, and I just ignored it, convincing myself it was just a phase. But looking back now, I couldn't deny it. It was all right there, in front of me. I still remember that first night after everything went down. I didn't sleep at all. Not even a wink. My phone buzzed a couple of times, but I ignored it. I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear their excuses or words of sympathy. I was done with all of them. By the time the morning came, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, not knowing what the hell was going on. So I called Emily. I hadn't spoken to her since the night I confronted her, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear what she had to say. But I didn't have a choice. The phone rang a few times before she picked up. "Hey," she said, her voice cautious, like she wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't waste any time with small talk. "We need to talk." There was a long pause on the other end. "About what?" she asked, her voice tight. She sounded almost offensive. "About everything, Emily. About you and Luke. About the lies. About all of it," I said, my voice calm but cold. She sighed, and I could almost hear her rubbing her temples. "I don't know what you want me to say, Sean. I already told you it was a mistake." I felt my blood start to boil again. A mistake? A mistake. The word tasted like acid in my mouth. How long did this mistake go on, Emily? How long were you going to keep lying to me? How long were you going to make me look like a fool? She didn't answer right away, and for a moment, I thought she might hang up. But instead, she took a deep breath. "I don't know what else to say, okay? I messed up. I know I did. But it was never about you. It was never because of you. It was me. I don't know. Things just got complicated, and I wasn't thinking clearly." "Complicated?" I shot back. "You don't just end up in bed with someone else because things are complicated. You made a choice, Emily. You chose to betray me." There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear her breathing, but she didn't speak right away. "I never meant to hurt you," she finally said, her voice breaking. "But I know I did, and I don't know what I can do to make it right." I shook my head, more to myself than to her. "You can't make it right. Not now. Not after everything that's happened." I stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the street. It felt so unreal. So much of what I thought I knew had been a lie. "I don't know what you expect from me, Emily, but I'm not going to be the guy you run back to just because you're sorry now. I'm not that guy." She was silent for a moment, and then she spoke, her voice softer. "So that's it then? You're done with me?" I didn't hesitate. "Yeah, I am." The line went quiet again, but this time, it wasn't awkward. It was final. It felt final. "You'll always have a place in my heart," she said, her voice barely a whisper. I closed my eyes for a second, trying to block out the memory of all the good times we had shared, all the things I thought I knew about us. But none of that mattered now. I had to let go. I had to let her go. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. I hung up the phone and stood there in silence for a long time. When I finally turned away from the window, I realized that I didn't feel any relief. It wasn't like I thought it would be. I didn't feel some overwhelming sense of victory or catharsis. What I felt was emptiness. A deep, hollow emptiness where everything I thought was real had been ripped away. Luke didn't text me for a while, but I knew he was probably waiting for me to reach out. Maybe he was hoping I'd give him some kind of closure, or maybe he was just feeling sorry for himself. I didn't care. I didn't want to hear from him. The only thing I wanted was to move on, to get past this. But there was no real getting past something like this. Not in a day, not in a week. I didn't know where to go from here. The truth was, I was scared. Scared of what my life would look like without Emily in it, without Luke, without the people who had been there for me for so long. But at the same time, I knew this was the right decision. I had to take my life back. I had to move on. And I was done pretending like things could ever go back to the way they were. A week passed. It didn't feel like a week, though. It felt like a year, like I was stuck in some time loop, waking up every day in the same haze of anger and disbelief. The worst part, The worst part was that I didn't even know where to start moving forward. It wasn't like I could just erase everything that had happened, pretend like it was a bad dream. No, this was real, and I had to deal with it. Every time I looked at my phone, I'd see a message from Luke or Emily, both of them trying to get through to me. Luke's messages were just like that, desperate, apologetic, the same kind of message someone sends when they realize they've ruined everything. Emily's were a bit more passive, but they all boiled down to the same thing, guilt. Guilt and regret. I hadn't responded to any of them. I couldn't. Not yet. I'd been keeping to myself mostly. I was avoiding friends, avoiding my usual hangouts, and spending most of my time either at home or at the gym, trying to drown out the noise in my head. The gym was my escape. There was nothing like pushing yourself to the limit, focusing on the weight in your hands and not on the mess in your life. But even the gym couldn't block out the fact that the people I trusted most had stabbed me in the back. I kept replaying the images in my head. The way Luke's eyes had widened when I confronted him. The guilt on his face when he realized I knew everything. The look in Emily's eyes the night she finally admitted to me what had been going on. I couldn't let go of any of it, no matter how much I tried. Eventually, I decided to stop checking my phone. It was like an addiction, waiting for a message that never came. The temptation to know if they were sorry, to hear how badly they felt about everything, was eating me alive. But that's when I realized none of that mattered anymore. They had both made their choices, and nothing they could say would fix what they had broken. So I went on with my life. Or at least, I tried. One afternoon, a couple of days later, I ran into a mutual friend of mine and Luke's at the grocery store. His name was Mark. He was a good guy, someone I'd known for years, but when I saw him, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach. "Hey man," he said as we passed each other in the aisles. "You good? I haven't seen you in a while." He looked a little nervous, like he wasn't sure how to approach me. I looked at him, trying to hold it together. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied. I knew that I didn't look fine. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, the weight in my chest, but I wasn't going to dump all of that on him. Not here. Not in the middle of a crowded grocery store. Mark hesitated, then glanced down at the floor before meeting my eyes again. "Look, man, I just wanted to say, I know what happened with you and Luke, and I know it's been rough. I just want you to know that I'm here for you, all right?" I nodded, but something inside of me twisted. "Thanks," I muttered. But there was a part of me that wanted to ask him, "Why didn't you say anything sooner? Why didn't you warn me?" Luke had been messing around behind my back, and the whole time, people like Mark had to have known. They had to have seen the signs. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. I couldn't even look at Mark for too long, without feeling like he was part of the whole mess. I just wanted to get out of that store, get away from the situation before I said something I'd regret. We exchanged a few more words, and then I walked away, feeling more alone than ever. That's when I knew it wasn't just Luke and Emily I was angry with. I was angry with the whole damn world. Angry at everyone who had allowed this to happen, who had kept their mouths shut while I stood there blindfolded, completely unaware of the betrayal brewing around me. But I didn't want to go on being angry. I knew that was only going to keep me stuck. But how the hell was I supposed to get over this? I was still living in the same apartment, the same place where Emily and I had shared our lives, our plans. It was hard to even walk into the kitchen without seeing some memory of us there, something we had done together, something we had talked about. It felt like I was trapped in the past, forced to live in a space that was full of ghosts. And Luke, even though I'd cut him out of my life, was still haunting me. I decided I needed to get away. I needed to step out of the world I knew and clear my head. So I took the weekend off. I packed a bag, left my apartment, and headed for a cabin in the woods that I'd rented. I didn't care about anything. I just needed space, to be by myself, to think without all the noise. I figured the isolation would be good for me. The first day there was strangely peaceful. The air was crisp, the sounds of nature drowning out everything else. I spent the day walking the trails, keeping my thoughts focused on the simple things around me. The trees, the birds, the fresh air. It was that night, though, as I sat in front of the cabin with a fire burning in the pit, that the weight of everything hit me. It was so quiet, so still, that I had no choice but to think about it all. The betrayal, the lies, the broken trust. The fact that Luke and Emily had both been selfish, that they had thought I wouldn't find out, that I wouldn't notice. I didn't know what to do with that anger. It was the kind of anger that made you want to burn everything to the ground, to tear it all apart. But I knew that wasn't the answer. What was the answer? I wasn't sure. But I knew I couldn't stay stuck in this limbo forever. I couldn't let them win by keeping me in a cage of bitterness. So, as the fire crackled and the stars hung overhead, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let them define me. I wasn't going to let their betrayal consume me. I didn't know what was next, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to stay the same. I was going to change. And somehow, some way, I was going to move forward. It's funny how life has a way of forcing you to change, whether you're ready for it or not. I'd spent the last couple of weeks wrestling with myself, trying to come to terms with everything. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. And through it all, I kept telling myself I'd figure it out, that somehow the pieces would fit together and I'd move on. But I hadn't really figured anything out. Not yet. That weekend at the cabin had been quiet. Too quiet in a way. I went there to escape, to find some clarity, but all I found was more uncertainty. The peace of the woods hadn't healed anything. It just gave me more space to think, to feel the weight of what had happened. And as much as I tried to tell myself I was fine, I knew deep down that I wasn't. I was still broken, still scarred, still angry. By the time I got back to the city, I had made my decision. I couldn't keep holding on to the past. It was like carrying around a heavy weight, something that made every day harder than the last. I couldn't move forward as long as I was dragging it behind me. So, I decided to make the final cut. I wasn't going to talk to Emily anymore. I wasn't going to talk to Luke. I wasn't going to waste another second on people who had shown me nothing but lies. If I was going to heal, I had to do it without them. And honestly, it felt good to finally make that choice. I texted Luke first. I didn't need to hear his apology anymore. I didn't need him to beg for forgiveness. I just needed to be free of him. Don't ever contact me again. I'm done. That was it. Short, simple, final. I didn't owe him anything. I didn't care how he felt. I stared at the message for a few moments, my thumb hovering over the send button. But then I pressed it, and the weight that lifted off my chest felt almost immediate. It was like I was letting go of something I didn't even realize was suffocating me. I did the same with Emily. I can't do this anymore. It's over. Goodbye. The finality of it was terrifying in a way, but it was also liberating. I realized that as long as I kept holding on, I was never going to move on. And I was so damn tired of being stuck in the same place, day after day. I was done pretending, done feeling sorry for myself. I didn't hear from them after that. Not that I expected to. I think they knew, deep down, that there was no coming back from what they'd done. The next few days were strange. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. I wasn't angry all the time. I wasn't checking my phone every few minutes. I wasn't consumed by the thoughts of betrayal. It was like a fog had lifted, even though the hurt was still there, lingering in the background. But I had a new focus now. I had a new purpose. I started to throw myself into things that mattered to me, things that I had pushed aside in the chaos of everything. I reconnected with old friends, the ones who had been there for me before all this happened, the ones I had ignored because I was too busy wallowing in my own misery. I focused on my work, on projects I had neglected, on building something for myself that had nothing to do with Emily or Luke. And little by little, I felt like I was putting myself back together. I didn't need to be angry anymore. I didn't need to prove anything. The people who mattered knew the truth, and that was enough for me. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I didn't owe Luke forgiveness, and I sure as hell didn't owe Emily a second chance. I started dating again, slowly. It wasn't easy, but it felt good to remember what it was like to connect with someone who wasn't hiding anything from me. I didn't jump into anything serious, but I found myself smiling again, laughing without the cloud of betrayal hanging over me. And maybe, just maybe, I could be happy again. I think the hardest part of it all wasn't the betrayal itself. It was learning to trust myself again. Trust that I wasn't wrong about the people I'd let into my life. Trust that I was worthy of honesty and loyalty. And most of all, trust that I could move on, that I could survive something like this. The truth is, I never saw it coming. The betrayal. The lies. I thought Luke was my brother. I thought Emily was the one. But life had different plans. And even though it hurt like hell, I learned that I could handle it. I could get through it. It didn't happen overnight, but slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild. I became someone who could stand on his own again. Someone who could look in the mirror and be proud of the person staring back at him. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. As for Luke and Emily, well, they faded into the past. They were part of a chapter in my life I had to close. And while I'd never forget what they did, I realized that I didn't have to carry it with me forever. I didn't have to let them define me. So yeah, it wasn't easy. It still isn't. But I've come out the other side stronger. And that's the best revenge I could have asked for.